Hi, my name is Amy. Welcome to Client Stories with DNAngels. Imagine waking up every day wondering where you came from, who your parents are, and what stories shaped the life you never knew. For Dave, who was adopted at birth, this was his reality: a lifetime of unanswered questions and an unshakable hope for closure. But little did he know that journey through DNA, family trees, and decades old secrets would lead him to life changing revelations. Stick around because this story will take you on a roller coaster of emotions from heartbreak to joy and everything in between. By the end, you're going to want to leave a green heart in support of Dave in the comment section. So Dave grew up as an only child to his adoptive parents. He had no names and no leads on who his biological parents were. All he knew is that they were teenagers when they conceived him. Dave was born and raised in Georgia, and that is a good point to remember in this story because it was the breakthrough that I needed to find his biological mother. When I started working Dave's case, I knew it wasn't going to be easy. His DNA matches were limited, only a few promising leads on one side and absolutely nothing promising on the other side. And to make matters even more complex, it was evident that his biological parents were both recent immigrants and the DNA pool was small. So not only was I working against not having a lot of records because of recent immigration, but also a very small pool of DNA. It appeared that one side of the family tree migrated here from Canada and the other from Poland. So I began building out the tree, focusing on the maternal line first. There were a couple matches that I was able to make a connection to a great great grandparent, and I had to start building down from there. It was tedious. It took me days to sift through the records and build fragmented trees together to finally land on a family who migrated to New York. Now, they had 13 children, and I knew I was going to find one of his biological parents somewhere in the downline of these 13 children, and likely a couple generations low. So there was a lot of work I had to do. Of course, as my luck has it, I started at the oldest child and I worked down to the youngest. Everybody stayed in New York, which was a blessing because as I got to the youngest sibling, I realized that they migrated to Georgia. So, although I wasn't able to make very many DNA connections on this side, the location is what pulled me to these two particular people. As I landed on the side that had migrated to Georgia, I knew this is where I had to focus my attention at. Um, there was only two options, which was nice because I didn't have to sift through a massive family. They had one child who went on to have two children, two girls. So this had to be the biological mother's side. And I mean, not based on DNA at this point yet, but based on location alone. It had to be them. So I found the contact information for the two sisters. I let Dave know, hey, these people, one of these two are likely your biological mother. We reached out to them via text message, phone calls, Facebook, and unfortunately, we didn't get a response. So I continued to dive into the what I assumed paternal side. So on the paternal side, we had a very close relative, a first cousin, who had the absolute most common name out there, John Smith. He didn't have a family tree, unfortunately, and it seemed like the trail was running cold. I had DNA connections to great grandparents, but I could not figure out who the grandparents were. It was driving me mad. I had mapped out the lines, I just couldn't figure out where they merged. So, using public records and a screen name that I had for John, I was able to locate him and his family. This was the breakthrough I needed for the paternal side. One of John's uncles was going to be his biological father. But who were his uncles? I couldn't figure it out for the life of me. There were no obituaries, no records. The public records were a little bit iffy. I was losing hope. How were we going to find out who his biological father was? And that's when one risky text changed it all. Out of options, I decided to take a leap of faith and I texted John's mother, explaining the situation that her son had taken a DNA test. He was a close first cousin match to somebody that I was helping build their biological family tree. I believed that this woman, Jane, was his biological mother, where she went to high school, and gave the information needed. Now, his mother was hesitant, as anybody would be getting a text message like that, but reached out to her husband and brother in laws and gave the information. And it was a couple days later that I received a return text stating, we were able to speak to his siblings. Here is the information you need for the family tree. We believe that Richard could be his biological father. Richard dated Jane in high school. So, with DNA evidence and family confirmation, I was able to finally call Dave and give him the information that he had waited over 40 years for. I was able to tell him that Richard was his biological father and Jane was likely his biological mother. The next step was getting in contact with Richard. Richard had asked for me to call him so he could get some more information and understand what was going on a little bit better. He had no idea that Jane was ever pregnant. And the phone call with Richard was one of the most emotional phone calls I have ever experienced in my time helping people find their biological families. Richard was overwhelmed with joy and grief at the thought that he had a biological son because Richard never married and didn't have any children of his own. When he called, all he could do was cry, and I just had to listen. My heart broke with him. To not know that you had a son who lived an hour away for 40 years is heartbreaking. It is earth shattering. And he showed me just how devastating that can be. So he shared this story about how him and Jane had met. They dated in high school, and Jane had a bit of a rocky upbringing. She lived with her aunt and uncle, who he believes did not approve of him. He was a self proclaimed hippie who walked around with no shoes. And he states he remembered the first time he went over to meet her aunt and uncle. He walked up with no shoes and long hair. And it was not long after that, Jane never spoke to him again. He never heard from her again, and he had no idea what happened. She just disappeared. Little did he know it was because she was pregnant, and she went off to go give birth at a woman's home and put the child up for adoption. Richard was overcome with joy and grief at the relationship that he was not able to have with Dave. I remember him telling me that if he would have just known, he would have raised Dave on his own. And while Richard embraced the chance to connect with the Dave, the story on Jane's side was a bit more complicated. Unfortunately, we were never able to get a hold of her. She endured a lifetime of heartache from having to put her son up for adoption to losing her only child later in life, and then a very tragic accident where her partner was taken too soon. Jane emotionally couldn't handle learning that Dave had found her. She has not responded to Richard's pleas for answers or to us trying to connect her with her biological son, Dave. But despite this, Dave and Richard have begun to form a meaningful bond. After spending decades apart and not knowing that they lived only an hour away from each other, they have been able to celebrate their very first holiday together as a family, where Dave was able to meet all of Richard's side of the family for Christmas this year. Dave's story is one of perseverance, hope, and the unshakable power of family. If this story moved you, don't forget to leave a green heart in the comment section to support Dave and Richard's journey. Let's celebrate the connections he's made and send hope that one day his biological mother will find the strength to reach out to him. Because stories like Dave's remind us that it is never too late to find out where you came from and who you really are. Thank you for watching.